Hi, general psychology students. Today we're going to look at conformity, one of the classic social psychology principles. Conformity is adjusting our behavior or our thinking to coincide with a group norm or a group standard. So we start to act or think like others. You might consider it following the behaviors of others like sheep or lemmings. Now sometimes when we conform, it's unconscious. This is called the chameleon effect. This is our unconscious mimicking of others' behaviors. Think of when you're waiting at a stoplight ready to cross the road. Maybe if you're not really paying attention but somebody else steps off the curb, what do? We tend to follow them, and that's that unconscious mimicking. That's the chameleon effect. Chartrand and Barge have studied this, and in the chart here what you see is that when participants are in a room with an actor, who we call a confederate in psychology research, with an actor who has been told to do a certain behavior, like face rubbing or foot shaking, then the participants themselves start to mimic that behavior. So when participants are in the presence of a face rubbing actor, they tend to do more of their own face rubbing compared to foot shaking. And then over here we see that when participants are in the presence of a foot shaker, we see more foot shaking than the face rubbing. And again, this is showing us the chameleon effect, one kind of conformity. We also conform for other influences. One of these is normative social influence. Think of this as peer pressure. Normative social influence is our desire to be accepted, so to gain approval or avoid rejection. So we're going to adjust our behavior in order to get that approval. In informational social influence, this is all about our desire to be right. So we are seeking information and we adjust our behavior in order to get that information. Looking more closely at normative social influence, again, this is our peer pressure. It's our conformity because we want to be liked or we want to avoid rejection or embarrassment. This influence tends to be most intense with very cohesive groups. And what cohesive means here is the attraction of the group for its members. So members really want to be a part of the group. In that case, normative social influence might be quite high. Also, in really large groups, we see normative social influence because it gets harder to know if you're a part of the group or not when groups are very, very big. So we need to conform and really show that we are a part of the group. So you'll see that kind of conformity. An example from my own life, and I'll admit a slightly embarrassing one, is that when I was in junior high around 13 years old, the cool group of kids was this group that, well, I really wanted to be a part of. So it was a cohesive group. I was very attracted to the cool group, and I hadn't been able to crack my way in yet. Well, this cool group used to hang out uptown, and one of the things they did was smoke cigarettes. And in order to really be accepted by the group, you had to smoke with them. So I started to adjust my behavior to meet that of the group. I stole a cigarette from my mom, had never done that before, and when we went uptown, I decided that I would go through this cigarette smoking ritual, which they required that you would take a drag, then talk, and then exhale the smoke, right, to really prove that you were smoking. So I go through this whole thing with them, really adjusting my behavior and conforming to this peer pressure. And I thought I was in. However, that cigarette made me sick, and I promptly vomited, and turns out you can't really stay in the cool group when you throw up in front of everyone. So there's my embarrassing peer pressure story. I'm sure you all have one too. When we look at informational social influence, again, this is our conformity because we want to be right. We need information and we think others might have more information, so we conform to be more like them. This is going to be most powerful for us when we're in an ambiguous situation, so we're really not sure what we should be doing. Or when it's a crisis, so there's a time crunch and we have to act, and we have to act correctly. Or when we think that other people are experts, we will tend to conform to them. So if you think of maybe going to college, if you really were not familiar with what this college thing would be like, you probably looked around for experts, maybe to teachers or to some of your peers who seemed like they knew what was going to happen, and you might have started to conform So changing your behavior to match theirs a bit more. There are some classic studies in social psychology about conformity, and one is the Sharif study. So basically what Sharif did was ask whether people would start to conform their answers on this ambiguous task if they were in a group. So the task was to determine how far a stationary point of light seemed to be moving. Now, it really wasn't moving, but it is normal for individuals to perceive some range of motion to this light. Participants were first asked to make an estimate on their own, and they came up with their answers, and then they were asked to make their estimates in a group. No matter what the participants' answers were, by the end of the group stage, they were in agreement with each other. The group had conformed to give a very similar answer for how far this light was moving. And the interesting thing is, Sharif then asked participants to come back on their own. After being in that group and then coming back for their own measurements again, they still gave the group's answer. So that conformity was really quite powerful in this ambiguous task. The Ash study is another classic conformity study. So what Ash asked was whether or not people would give obviously incorrect answers if that incorrect answer conformed to the group. So he presented participants with these two images that you see. On the left is the standard line, and on the right are the comparison lines. And what he asked was, which one of the comparison lines is exactly the same as the standard line? Now this is not a visual trick. The answer is obviously number 2. That is the same length as the standard line. So this shouldn't be an ambiguous task. We probably won't have informational social influence going on. What he did was bring one participant into the room with 6 Confederates. So again, the Confederates are actors and they have a line to say. The Confederates start saying the wrong answer. So when asked which line looks like it's the same as the standard line, they go, maybe it's number 3. And then one by one, all the Confederates give the wrong answer. So we're wondering, how many participants would give the obviously wrong answer? They can tell that the answer is number 2. Surprisingly, 76% of participants conformed at least once. So overall, they were agreeing about in the 40% range with these wrong answers. So that means that even for us, we will give the obviously wrong answer, more of the time than not when we have the opportunity to conform to a group. Now, we don't always conform, obviously. We're not exactly the same as each other. And some of the reasons for this is that we do like some individuality, and we do want to feel like we have an internal locus of control, so we have some control over our life. As well, when we have a non-conforming ally, we are much more likely to be able to break away from that conformity and those social influences. So to summarize, you've already discussed social norms by looking through my lecture and reading your book. Then when we look at conformity, we have our unconscious mimicking of others' behavior, that's the chameleon effect, and those social influences, both normative and informational. And in particular, I want you to review the Ash study for its findings on conformity.